Man, it's good to be here with you. There's a truth that unites us, and the truth is this: whether we know it or not, at any given moment, we're desperate for water. 2016, there was a guy named Chaz Powell. He was hiking. He was on an expedition of the Zambezi River. He was hiking the entire length. He had hiked about 20 miles a day until he reached at one point in the river where it started to grow in elevation, and the hike started to bring him along a ledge high above the river, so high, in fact, that he could no longer reach down and grab water and no longer hike down and get water. With daytime temperatures climbing at 122 degrees, Chaz Powell started to lose water at the rate of 2 liters per hour. That's a lot of water. And in this moment, like I'm reading this story, in this moment, can you imagine the deep thirst that this man has as he's hiking along this water that's rushing underneath of him, boiling over the rocks? But he has to peer down and watch as his thirst continues to grow. Now, the problem is this terrain had become so rugged that even though he had previously hiked 20 miles a day, he was limited to hiking around 2 to 3 miles every single day, trying to trudge his way along. He couldn't make it back down to the river. He was having a hard time making it any further. And he got to the place where his body started to shut down. So he did what he knew he needed to do. He pushed the SOS beacon on his sat phone and waited for someone. When he got word back, he found out that it was going to take multiple hours for them to get to him. In fact, too many hours for them to get to him. So he did the only thing that he could do. Chaz Powell dug a hole in the ground in order to cool off in the dirt that was lower in the soil, and he drank the only water he had left with him. And it wasn't with him, it was in him. Let's just say that Chaz Powell skipped a few steps in the water cycle at that moment. And the reality is that it's a moment like that where you recognize how desperate we all are for living water. For Chaz Powell, it was that moment in that hole. But for another guy, 2011, it was a guy named Henry. He was stuck in the desert of Arizona for 5 days. And in the midst of that moment, he drank the only thing that he could find. It was windshield wiper fluid in his own vehicle. That same year, 11 soldiers at Fort Bliss were so desperately thirsty, in this case for alcohol, that they drank what they thought was alcohol, but in reality what was actually antifreeze. One of my favorite stories is actually of a guy back in 2006. His name is Jean-Luc Vergis. And Jean-Luc Vergis was hiking through a cave system. In fact, he was hiking this cave system because he found himself depressed. He left his wife. He left his 14-year-old son at home. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey, grabbed some sleeping pills, put them in his pocket, and took off in his truck. He made his way to an entrance of a cave, started hiking through this cave. As he is hiking through this cave with his flashlight battery starts to die. And pretty soon it flickers and it goes completely dead. I'm reading the story, I'm just fascinated. Like, what would it be like in that moment? Have you ever been in a cave where they turn off the lights? You think you can see your hand, but it's really just this phantom in front of you. In that moment, Jean-Luc Vergis is lost in the darkness. He's wandering around. The mud is so thick in the bottom of the cave it pulls off both of his shoes and both of his socks. He's crawling around. You don't just go running through a cave in the darkness. He's crawling around now in the bottom of this cave, and a day goes by, 24 hours go by, 2 days go by. And you can imagine that in that cave, he needed something to drink. He needed something to eat. So what did he do? He got down on his hands and on his knees, and he felt around for those puddles that were accumulating, and even some of his own footprints, and he scooped down into those puddles and pulled that water up to his lips and drank. A week went by. 2 weeks went by. 21 days. A month goes by, and Jean-Luc Vergis is still in this cave. 35 days go by, and he's still wandering in this darkness, going from puddle to puddle, drinking whatever water he can find. And as I read these stories at times remind me of us. That some of us at times we go from not puddle to puddle, but from relationship to relationship, from source to source, from money to success to approval to appearance. We go from puddle to puddle, trying to find something in the darkness that might possibly quench this thirst that's somewhere deep inside of us. I mean, we even use the word thirst, let's just admit it. We use the word thirst in slang as well as in lyrics to describe what we even are searching for, some of the puddles we're going to. So tonight as we open up our Bibles, my question for you is this. What puddles do you find yourself going to, trying to quench this thirst that's deep inside of each of us? If you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 4. It's in John chapter 4 that we find this story that we've already heard read to us this evening. It's the story of the woman at the well. And here's what I've came to say to you. This is this message in one sentence. Jesus meets you at the well. He meets you at the well where you are trying to quench your own thirst. In John chapter 4, Jesus is hiking as well. I love the outdoors. I love to hike. I'm from Colorado originally. And this is what I love to do with our family. We love to be in the outdoors. But one of the things we know is that as we're hiking, we need to have a source of water. So I have a life straw that we can use as an emergency to be able to suck water out of a river and survive. We need water. We know this. We need it to survive. This is true for Jesus as well. That even as Jesus comes and he dwells among us in the flesh, Jesus gets thirsty, Jesus gets tired, and he's traveling with his disciples. I've actually hiked some of these roads before in Israel. Jesus has hiked 30 miles with his disciples, and John tells us he's tired. John tells us that Jesus is hiking through Samaria. In fact, what it says there, if you notice in verse 4, is that Jesus had to go through Samaria. And scholars will tell us, well, Jesus really didn't have to go through Samaria. There's actually another route. In fact, guys like Nicodemus from this morning would oftentimes take this other route. He would go around the neighborhood of Samaria rather than go through it. And so oftentimes it's pointed out, look at Jesus. What's John telling us here in this story? He had to go through Samaria. Why did he have to go? He didn't have to go because it was the only route. He had to go because he had someone he had to meet. I love the video that you all watched of the streets of Japan. And as I watched that video, I can't help but imagine that if Jesus were to walk through those streets, he would be able to recognize those of you in this room or in those streets, those of you who are desperate for living water. That's what happens in this story, is he had to go through Samaria because he had someone he had to meet there. He comes to a town, it's really just a village. Some of you are from a town, you want to call it a city, but it's really just a village. He came from a town came up to a town called Sychar, and he comes to this well called Jacob's Well, and it's there that this woman comes up to meet him. John tells us that this encounter happened at noon. And again, we kind of go, well, this is a little bit of an odd detail. Like, why is this woman coming to this well in the middle of the day, the middle of the heat of the day? In fact, when we study sociology, we discover that people oftentimes came to the well in the morning or late in the evening in order to get away from the heat of the day. After all, I mean, water weighs in at 8 pounds a gallon. But here's this woman coming up during the heat of the day. Was she coming to come by herself, to avoid shame? To avoid the stares, to avoid the gossip of so many people who knew her story? We don't know. We just notice this detail that John puts in the story that he highlights for us, and we have to recognize that there's something going on here, that for some reason this woman chooses to come in the middle of the day to avoid the crowd. Maybe it was the vibe she got when she came and she hung out with all of the other people there. And I have to wonder at times if some of you don't get that same vibe from the people at your school, at your church, in your youth group. At times where you see the stares and you know the gossip and you know the shame because they know your story. And yet it's this woman that Jesus comes to meet in this particular moment. She's the face he picks out of the crowd. It's this preordained moment. And I can't help but wonder, are there some of you here this evening that you didn't know? You thought you were just one in the crowd, but Jesus is actually wanting to use this moment, use this week, use this place, use this room as a well where he wants to come and meet you and talk about your story. She's about as unlikely of a person as you can imagine for Jesus to want to have a conversation with. And yet what we discover again and again and again is that Jesus is for all people. He's not just for the Nicodemus we learned about this morning. He's for this woman too. In fact, I find it intriguing, if you notice in John's story, that Nicodemus comes at night to follow Jesus. This woman comes in the very heat, brightest moment of the day. What's going on in John's narrative? I think here's what's going on. Nicodemus comes at night because he's afraid that Jesus might hurt his own reputation. But this woman encounters Jesus in the day because Jesus isn't worried about this woman harming his reputation. See, Jesus is not avoiding you because of your story. Some of you need to hear this. Jesus is not turning his face away because of your brokenness and because of your messy story. Jesus is for you. He is for all people. And in this moment, he encounters this woman at this well. In the moment where the sun is at its brightest, it exposes her story, but he still embraces her. He comes up to her, and I love what he says. Will you give me a drink? Now, this was a common request. This is about as normal as when you sit down at a restaurant, a waiter or waitress comes up, and what's the first thing they ask? What can I get you to drink? What can I get you to drink? So what do you usually order to drink at a restaurant? What do you order? I heard a lot of sweet tea. All right, so you order something to drink. All right. So Jesus in the moment, this is kind of a normal moment for Jesus where he asks for a drink. And yet notice in this moment that Jesus is starting a conversation because he knows something is true about each of us, that all of us are desperate for living water. It's a truth that unites all of us. No matter our differences, no matter our backgrounds, no matter our baggage, this truth is a truth that unites each of us. And so he starts down this conversation. Now this woman is surprised by it because normally Jews do not associate, she says, uses that language, do not associate with her people, the Samaritans. In fact, they don't even actually share dishes. She would be considered unclean. She's an outside person who comes at noon from an outside people. Notice how distant she should stand from Jesus, how distant he should stand from her. She's an outcast from an outcast people, and yet Jesus has come to meet with her. Jesus is for all people. And so she asks, how can you ask me for a drink? He responds in verse 10, and he says this, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. He takes the topic of water, and he's going to take what on the surface is so common that all of us need it. And he's going to make it a spiritual, a hard issue where he's going to say, I want you to recognize that this truth that's on the surface, that you need water, is a truth that's down deep inside of you. And it's a gift. Notice he says it's a gift. It's not something you do to earn it. You don't deserve this. This is a gift. And what's the source? Jesus says, it's he. It's me. So this conversation continues. And the reason we recognize that as Jesus talks about that this woman is confused and she's trying to figure out what he's wanting, she's encountering Jesus for the first time. And many of you are coming to Jesus, and maybe this week you're coming and you're going, I need to continue to learn more. Like, what is he saying? Do I believe this? She comes and she's a little confused. She says, you didn't even come here with anything to draw water. So how can you give me this water? I mean, Jacob gave us this well. Our father, who is the father of both of our people, he gave us this well. Are you greater than him? The irony is, yes, he is. Here's what I find interesting. Take your cup. I want you to hold on to your cup. This well is called Jacob's well. Now, I don't know the significance of this, but I want you to hear the name of the well. The name Jacob is a name that means someone who is always grabbing for something more. In fact, if you remember that story from the Old Testament, it's okay if you don't. He's always grabbing for something from his brother or from other people. He's always wanting more. He's always thirsty for something more. But Jacob's nickname is Israel. The name Israel is someone who wrestles with God. Here's the irony. The name of the well they're meeting at is a name that means wrestling with God, a name that means someone who's always grasping for more. This cup this evening, I want it to represent something to you. So I need your help. I need you to take this cup, and I just need you to hold it. And what I want you to do this evening is to have an encounter like this woman does with Jesus in this story. Is they're having a conversation over the top of this well that is named Jacob's well. This name that means someone who wrestles with grasping and wrestles with God, and they're always thirsty. God's people in the story are always thirsty as they wrestle with God. But I want you to ask this question tonight. What's the name of my well? You see, Jesus comes to meet you at the well. And he wants to give you living water. But he also wants to expose the real name, the real identity, the real source of the well where you're trying to quench your thirst. He wants to expose the fact that so many of us are going around from puddle to puddle, and we're thinking that certain things in this world that we find will quench that thirst, but in reality they leave us just like this woman, thirsty. And so she says to him, give me that living water so I don't have to keep coming here to draw out water again and again and again and again. You hear the desperation in her voice? Jesus comes to expose that well. And so in verse 16, he turns and he says, okay, so go call your husband and then come back. And her answer is the shortest answer she has in the text in verse 17. She says this, I have no husband. And then Jesus, who knows us and knows the true identity of our well, Jesus says this, you're right. You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands. And the man you have now is not your husband. What you've said is quite true. Here she is, completely exposed in the light of the day, the full sun of noon, and she discovers that Jesus knows everything about her. Jesus knows her story. Now, there's really 2 options for her story. We can kind of start to make some guesses about her story. I mean, here's option number 1, is that she has been unfaithful over and over and over again, not just to 1 husband, but to 5 husbands. And the husband she has now, the man she's with now, number 6, he's not even her husband. Maybe she has been searching for affection and for love and for intimacy or maybe even pleasure over and over again, and she's been unfaithful. Maybe that's her story, and maybe her well is the well of relationship. Or maybe, actually it's what's more likely, is maybe she's been abandoned by one man after the other. Maybe, not just 1 time, but 5 times she's been rejected and divorced and abandoned. And the 6th person, the 6th man she's with now, won't even give her a marital covenant. Can you sense perhaps her insecurities, her loneliness, her thirst for affection? Can you sense perhaps at this well her desire to be loved, to be accepted? See, we don't know her story, but either way, here's what's interesting, is Jesus comes along in this story, and if you know John, if you read John's story, one of the things that's interesting about Numbers is that she's been with 6 different people, and none of them have quenched her thirst. Jesus comes along, and he's number 7 in the story, and the number 7 for John is a number of completion. It's just a symbol for completion. What John's trying to say to us is this, what she has been trying to fill in her life with relationships, only Jesus can come in and fulfill. In Jesus, she was completely known. He knew her story. And yet, only in Jesus was she both completely known and completely loved and accepted. Jesus encounters her, not Nicodemus, in the daytime. Jesus encounters her and knows everything about her and says, I am for you. This cup. What's your well? I mean, for her, if it was relationship after relationship that she was trying to quench her thirst, what is it for you? What I want you to do this evening is, at some point, maybe right now, take out a pencil or a pen and maybe put a label on your side of this cup to identify the well where Jesus is meeting you, the well where you're trying to quench your thirst, but you find yourself thirsty again and again. What word will it be? Maybe it is the word relationships. and you write that word on this cup. But maybe that's not you. Maybe the puddles that you go to are words like this. Maybe the word is money. By the way, a study was done of high school students to ask what is key for your happiness, and 86% of you responded, money. And the truth is that you know this, that you always need more, that there's more money that you will need. That thirst is never quenched. So maybe it's success. Maybe your word is athletics. Maybe you've started to recognize that no matter how many times you win, no matter how many championships, no matter how much applause, no matter how many awards or podiums, people always want more out of you. Coaches are always asking you, are you thirsty for more? Fans are never satisfied. They're asking for another championship, another year. Parents, some of you are thirsty for their approval. Maybe the word you put on here is applause. Maybe the word you put on here is approval. Maybe the word you put on here is appearance. Maybe you come to the well to find your identity, to find something quenched inside of you, and you come to it, so you quit eating, you spend hours at the gym, you habitually step on a scale, you post the pictures, and you look for the likes, and you look for the loves, and you're hoping that at some point that you will look a certain way, that you will be content with that. And you go to the well again and again and again, day after day after day after day. But you find yourself thirsty again. You find yourself empty. And some of you, the word is addiction. The word you put on the cup is the word pornography or alcohol, painkillers, or maybe even just entertainment. See, the interesting thing about a room like this is that we all have a well. And no matter how long you've been following God, no matter how long you've been following Jesus, Jeremiah says this in the Old Testament about God's people, that sometimes we actually forget that God is the source of living water, and so we dig our own cisterns, we dig our own wells, but they're broken and they don't hold water. We're thirsty. But there's no relationship, no achievement, no platform, no podium, no trophy, no experience, no amount of money, no pleasure, no possessions. Nothing holds water. And Jesus comes to this woman, and he meets her at this well, and he offers her living water. Jesus says to her, I'm he. I'm the one that you are thirsty for. Now, she starts to grasp his identity. She starts calling him sir at the beginning of the story. She says, well, you must be a prophet. She asks him about worship because she's starting to recognize that if she's going to come and find this water that's going to quench down deep inside of her, that it's going to come at worship. Man, I love the opportunity we have this week to come and worship. It's an opportunity to come to the well and to drink from the well of living water. And Jesus says, it doesn't matter where you worship. It's a matter about who. Coming to me, worship in spirit and truth. And finally, she comes down to the truth of his identity. She says, I know that the Messiah is coming. And when he comes, I know that he's going to explain everything to us. You see, I think in this moment, she's starting to pick up on Jesus' identity. She's starting to recognize that what she's been longing for is someone to come in and rescue her. To rescue her from her own pain, from her own story, from her own shame, from her own guilt. To rescue her from this thirst. To rescue her from hopelessness. And she's starting to pick up on the fact that Jesus might be him. And so she says, I know when the Messiah comes. And I imagine there's this sense of just hoping. And maybe some of you, you're sitting on the edge of your seat going, is this Jesus story true? Is he really for all people? Is he really for me? And at the end of this, Jesus says, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Jesus offers her living water. What I believe is this. In Jesus, you are offered life. In Jesus, you are offered the hope that no matter what life throws at you, that there is an end to your story that ends in victory. In Jesus, you will find that you find acceptance, even in the midst of your failures and flaws. In Jesus, you discover the truth of your identity, that you're not an accident, that you're not just living your life out to find your own pleasure, but that your identity is secure in Him, that He has created you, that your worth is in Him. You find out that you're loved, even though you're fully known. You find out that you can be forgiven. This living water makes us clean. We come to this river and it renews our strength. And I don't know, but my hunch is this, is that some of you here this evening are desperate for someone to say these words that this woman experiences in this moment. I love you. I choose you. I accept you. Can you hear the words that are coming from this side of the conversation of the well? I'm cheering for you. I want to know you. I'm here for you. You see, the reason why we build cities and towns next to living water is because we know we're desperate for living water. And one of the things we want to encourage you to do this week is to evaluate your connection with Jesus and build your life next to the living water that can be a source of your life day to day, moment after moment. Because, quite frankly, we've all come to moments similar to Chaz Powell, where we're desperate. We've all been in moments where we've discovered how desperate we are for living water. Chaz Powell knew in that hole that he had dug that he would die if he stayed there. And so he did what he had to do. He climbed out of that hole, and he climbed toward the edge of that cliff and started to stumble his way down the rocks, down toward the river. He could see it down there. He could see the water rolling over the boulders. At one point, he fell 15 feet. His face was bloody. But eventually, he made it down to that water. Could you imagine that moment of drinking in that living water that was fresh and life-giving? Restoring of strength and cooling of his body. You see, the reality of the story of Jesus is that He doesn't make you come to Him. Is that He is the one who takes that treacherous road to you. He is the one whose face is bloody, who is nailed to the cross, who cries out, I thirst. And He did it on a walk toward you so that He could offer you living water. Jean-Luc Geverges had been in that cave for 35 days. And 2 high school students happened to be driving next to the entrance of that cave one day when they had skipped school and recognized his vehicle. There is no way he could have rescued himself. But they alerted the authorities, and the authorities came in with light and with water and with food. This woman at the well, she encounters Jesus, and in this one moment, in this one encounter with Jesus, she recognizes He is the one that she had been needing all along, that He is the one that brings her out of darkness, that He is the one to quench her thirst. And so she runs back into town. Come and see the one who's told me everything I've ever done. Now that's quite the story. Everyone in town's like, we gotta go see what's going on here. And they come out and they see Jesus. But it's this little detail in the story that gets me every time I read the story. Because in her encounter with Jesus, what she thought she was thirsty for, she sits down at the well and she leaves it in order to follow. Because Jesus was the one who filled her need. What well do you need to leave here this week?